I had been playing sidekicks, best friends, and pals for 10 years in Hollywood. And then I did a science fiction TV series. And then I did a horror movie, and they were both #1 in the world. I always am asked if I feel bad about being typecast in horror. And I have to remind people that for 10 years, I was the buddy, the pal, the best friend, the sidekick. But I was, savvy enough to know that the sidekicks of my generation don't age well, those characters. In the 30s and 40s and 50s, you had, Walter Brennan and Arthur O'Connell. You had, the big stars had older sidekicks and pals. But starting in the 70s, the sidekicks went on a younger thing. So I knew I was going to age out of those. I was typed as that kind of guy all through the 70s. So I'd already lived through that once. So it's sort of like the stages of my career are sort of pre-Freddy. Robert Englund, the sidekick, the best friend, the pal. Then there was sort of the debut of Freddy and V, fantasy, science fiction, and horror. Meet Robert Englund, international audiences. And then there's post-Freddy. There's the Freddy years, which are a fat 10 years, 84 to 94. And then there's a period of just me sort of taking advantage of having had the successful horror franchise. And I became a sort of go-to horror actor because of the way I was aging. It was sort of serendipitous that I sort of fit into the shoes a little bit of Vincent Price and people like that. And it was just a great thing. And I also was international at the same time. So when I wasn't working in Hollywood, I was working in London or Rome or Africa or Mexico or even Russia. So I think I've done 14 or 15 movies overseas. It's just been a great ride.
I think you were testing her, you bastard.
Hey, give us a break here, Blake.
You believed all along she was coming back to you.
Hey, come on now. My boy has a dog.
I told you a while back, you can't grow without burning.
I don't need this
You do.
Craig, hey, listen to me. Now, you check this spa. Nita told me that Mary Tate was going back there to pick up her stuff. Listen, I got to get out front, all right?
Arnold was such a sweetheart on Stay Hungry, Arnold Schwarzenegger. We just lost the late, great Bob Rafelson. And I think Stay Hungry is one of his most humane movies. And it deals with the New South and a little bit of class distinction. But it's a very human movie. And Arnold, was this big, sweet teddy bear that we all fell in love with. A lot of us, Jeff Bridges, myself, Jeff worked with him a lot more than I did, but Jeff and I was his greaser. I was always oiling Arnold up in the background. I was in all those scenes, but I'm there with a squirt bottle and a towel. We all wanted to take care of Arnold when we got back to Hollywood. We felt like we had discovered this wonderful guy, this sweet guy. And of course, we got back to Hollywood and we realized that Arnold already owned half of Ocean Park between Santa Monica and Venice. He was already this unbelievably successful entrepreneur because he'd taken all of his promotional stuff from bodybuilding and turned it into real estate. So it was more like, Arnold, can I borrow money from you? He didn't need any help. And it was sort of an eye opener for us, because we only knew him on location. And I knew him also from a brief appearance in Robert Altman's Long Goodbye. But that was it, and he was just the nicest guy. Years later, I was going to the opening of I think it was in Las Vegas, the first Planet Hollywood. And I think Arnold might have been a partner with Bruce Willis and the others. But I remember having a couple of Bushmills downstairs and being told to go up to the VIP lounge. And I rushed up the stairs, and at the top of the stairs, there was a full-figured Freddy with the original, sweater and pants and hat and claw on it. And I think on the other side was the original alien, the Giger alien, at the top of the stairs. And I was kind of distracted by those, and I bumped into this guy's back, these men with buds in their ears and little microphones taped to their cheek and tinted glasses on kind of grabbed me. I looked up and he was a big guy. It was George Bush Sr. I bumped into the back of the president, and Arnold was there, and Arnold came over and just put his arm around me and kind of rescued me from the Secret Service guys. Arnold goes, he belongs here, he's one of us, I was like, thank God, because I, was brimming with Irish whiskey and starstruck by the president. and all of the other people at the opening. So Arnold saved me.
I said quit playing the master with your friends, Captain. Oh, buddy. I'm done calling acting. Did you know that, buddy? I'm setting myself with my own bloody fingernail. Did you know that? Do you even care?
Galaxy of Terror was the movie I chose to do and was fortunate enough to have been signed, sealed, and delivered for. Roger Corman movie, but it was at that actor's strike, the one we had back in 1980 or 79. At the time, I was so paranoid about money, and we all signed up for an incredible cast, Galaxy of Terror, Grace Zabriskie and Aaron Moran from Happy Days, and Eddie, the great late Eddie Albert Jr. Oh, what a sweetheart. I remember I had this terrible Roger Corman dressing room, which was hinged flat, a pin hinge flat and a plastic chair with cigarette burns on it and one bent hanger, for my own clothes while I was in wardrobe. And I wanted to make it nice, and I expanded it a little bit. And I think I put a cot in it, an army cot. And across from me was the art department. And there was a guy in there with hair down his back, long blonde hair. And he was in the art department and building the sets. And he would be throwing out these drawings he was doing for one of the creatures in Galaxy of Terror. I would, flatten them out and pin them up to decor because they were amazing stuff. Well, it was James Cameron. And he had literally, to save money for Roger Corman, gone through the dumpster and taken Whopper foam boxes, opened them up, and stapled them on the octagonal tunnels of our spacecraft to give it a kind of waffling, kind of like the dashboards of the contemporary cars now, acoustical thing, and sprayed them all flat black. And gave it this texture and then put pinholes in them. And so there was this great kind of spackle lighting, that came down on us whenever we were in those corridor shots. And I heard that a German watch company had come in and paid Roger an exorbitant fee to use those corridors for a watch commercial. In fact, practically paid for most of the budget of the film. That's how clever Roger was. But I've seen that corridor that we worked on. I've seen it borrowed by so many movies since. And I think ours literally cost us about, $29.99. But it was James Cameron and his genius and thinking on his feet. And there I was sitting on my little soiled plastic chair, putting on my space jumpsuit, and looking at drawings and some of his concept work. For the show, that I used, and I wish I had kept it all now because it would be so valuable.
Hey, watch out where the hell you're going.
Oh, excuse. Help, please.
Help what?
I am just.
Just what?
Yes.
Oh, get out of the way, damn stupid alien.
I was auditioned for V at my alma mater, Warner Brothers. I was established at Warner Brothers. They knew me over there. I'd gone down to the wire. Kenneth Johnson, the great Kenneth Johnson, Incredible Hulk and Bionic Man, Bionic Woman. Kenneth and I had this interview, and it was this alien who was a malaprop, and I figured, well, this might be comedy relief, but I'm not really sure and how to approach this and an alien. And, should I be robotic or should I have some kind of weird Arab accent because I was meant to be sent to somewhere in one of the Arab states but I'd been mistakenly sent with the aliens to LA, and I was having problems with my English or computing it. And I said, Kenny, what do I do here? I said, give me some advice here. Give me some help. And Ken Johnson, I remember he looked at me and he said 2 words. I'm ready for the get. He said, Gene Wilder. And I went, what? Oh, and I love that kind of shortcut help from a director because he knew I was an actor. He was sure that I knew who Gene Wilder was. And I love Gene. And I knew stories about Gene Wilder being in the original Cuckoo's Nest off Broadway with Kirk Douglas. So I knew enough. And I was fascinated with his improv work in Bonnie and Clyde. And I just sort of channeled Gene Wilder, and that was my audition. And me channeling Gene Wilder is not anything like Gene Wilder, but there was a hesitancy and a bit of a stutter and an innocence that Gene Wilder embodies. And I just took all of those and kind of, processed them through my imagination, and I read for the part and I got the part, and that's the show that made me an international actor before I did Nightmare on Elm Street.
Please, God.
This is God.
I half expected when I went on my interview for Nightmare on Elm Street that Wes Craven was going to be this guy all dressed in black, rather goth, with a black goatee or something like that. And I walk in the office and he's, resplendent in Ralph Lauren, and he's got tortoiseshell reading glasses, and a nice, clean, trimmed, immaculate beard. And he's this erudite raconteur. He began to tell me what his vision was for Nightmare on Elm Street. And I was smart enough to zip my lips and shut up. And I played a staring game with him, and I did that old thing we do in school. As I listened and I pretended to listen, well, I was listening, but I kind of exaggerated my listening pose. I also tried not to blink. I had also, before I went into the reading, I had greased my hair down with some oil from under the hood of my car. And I'd taken a little bit of cigarette ash and dabbled it under my eyes. It's an old stage trick. It looks very natural, but it actually didn't give me bags like I have now, but it sunk my eyes. But it looked natural, the discoloration under my eyes. So I wasn't tan, blonde, curly William Cat Robert Englund then. With apologies to William Cat, he's much better looking than I ever was. But that sort of was my persona then, and a great American hero, blonde ringlets and tan. And I had my hair is thin and fine, so when I greased it back, you could see the shape of my skull. I knew there was going to be a reveal in the film where Freddy shows his baldness, and I thought that would help. Wes just telling me this vision of his, this haunting sort of landscape of the nightmare, and then me, feigning extra attentively, listening him and trying not to blink my eyes so that they look kind of strange. I think those are all the things that went into me getting that phone call on my answering machine. Remember answering machines? Getting that message that you got the part.
Just tell us what you want, all right? Yeah, I'm here to help you.
Help yourself.
The Freddy franchise erupted after Nightmare 2 because I think they realized then how big it was internationally. I was just sort of hooked on the ride. I had an amazing, happy accident in my career. I had been playing sidekicks, best friends, and pals for 10 years in Hollywood. And then I did a science fiction TV series. And then I did a horror movie, and they were both #1 in the world. My miniseries and Nightmare on Elm Street. So I became an international actor overnight. And I first experienced international fans and seeing that global thing that can happen to an actor's career. Great blessing, great happy accident to my career. I was making good money on V. It wasn't necessary for me to negotiate for Nightmare 1 or Nightmare 2 for that matter, because they were all overlapping, those projects. And now I knew that I was known as Freddy, and so I wanted to be rewarded for it. So I sort of stuck with it, and I'm really happy I did with parts 3 and 4. And I was also in love with the international aspect of it, because I would work on one of the films, I would prepare for one of the films, I would shoot the films, and then I would go out and do international publicity, everywhere from Tokyo to Sydney, Australia, to London and Paris and Rome. And I loved that. It was the first time I'd ever done international junkets. I'd done American junkets before, but never international junkets. And I was also doing American junkets at the same time. So I loved all that. I think Mark Hamill told me this. I think Mel Brooks gave him some advice about when you're on the merry-go-round, you never get off, you just stay on it while it which if you're lucky enough to get on it. So I just stayed with it. The happy accident of that choice is that my face aged after I took the makeup off in 94, when we'd done the first battery of the Nightmare on Elm Street movies, I had aged. And my face was turning into an interesting character. I was no longer young. I was no longer this kid that I'd been all through the 70s. And so I could do other horror films. And I was maturing as an actor so that I could segue into sort of Vincent Price, Christopher Lee parts. And that was just this great thing that, I was glad, because I couldn't go back to being, the pal, the kid, the buddy, the sidekick. I'd aged out of those. So it was just this, again, just this happy accident of a career.
Sorry to keep you waiting. Perhaps if there was more of me to spread around.
I would love to be invited to Cameo if they remade part 3, for instance, The Dream Warriors, which I'm sure would have an astounding audience, because it's, I think, the most popular film in the franchise. There's that great character of the skeptical therapist, when they have the group therapy with all the kids that are having, Nightmare on Elm Street dreams. They're dreaming of Freddy collectively. And she's very skeptical of that. And it was played by the great Priscilla Pointer. I would love to do a gender switch, play Priscilla's role, play the skeptical therapist, that's taking care of all the kids that are having their kind of common Freddy nightmare. I think it would be fun, to see me in that role, someone that doesn't believe in Freddy, And there's a tradition, in horror and fantasy films and science fiction, when they do remakes, of people coming back to Cameo, and I don't think it would throw the movie that much out of kilter. But I won't don the fedora or strap on the claws again, because I'm just a little too old.
What will I think when I see you?
You'll just die.
Yeah, I did Phantom, and that's Dwight Little. I really respected Dwight, and I thought, well, I'm in good hands with him. But I said, I've got to have, the makeup's got to be great. So I got, the great Kevin Yeager, who worked with me on Nightmare on Elm Street and created the Chucky persona, the Chucky doll. Dwight and I had a couple of cocktails, and he wanted to do it saturated color, like a great Hammer film. And the moment he said that, I knew it. Like the movies that Dwight and I had seen at the drive-in movies, we were both on the same page, and I felt that. We went over to Budapest, and we shot the movie. We had and wonderful actors in it. Are in that movie, and it was just a wonderful adventure. I can remember going to the studio with my driver, who looked like Steve McQueen, and we were next to the old KGB headquarters in Budapest, and my wife and I get up at dawn to go out to the studio, Magyar Studios. Winter was ending and spring was beginning, and it was just a magical time. And we would go to the studios, and they had just finished with another great actor, the late great Raul Julia. They had just finished Mac the Knife, their Threepenny Opera, but we used their Jack the Ripper era sets that were magnificent sets. So we took our Phantom of the Opera from Paris Opera to the London Opera of the same period, but also the city of Jack the Ripper. So it had that feeling, that kind of Hammer film feeling. Jamaica. For the rough rat. I can tell you a jokey story. I mean, I had to work with those goddamn eels with Wes Craven. Had these eels instead of snakes, and use them to terrorize the kid and everything in one of the sequences in Freddy Hell. And he couldn't get the eels to do anything. They weren't working, and we were into lunch hour. And of course, as you know, in Hollywood, when you go into lunch hour, everybody gets more money on their paycheck, because it's called a meal penalty. MEAL penalty. And Wes was yelling at us to get the shot because he was pissed off about the eel penalty. So to give you an idea, insight into Wes, the horrific punster from hell. But I'll remember that day very much. And I think I got a lot of bruises on New Nightmare. I think I was just always hurting myself on that one. Just little things, but I would always wake up the next morning with a bruise, as well as little pieces of the Freddy makeup still attached, because we were working some long hours on that.
This is what we call an urban legend. Contemporary folklore passed on as a true story. Something you might have heard about mixing pop rocks and soda.
Supposedly, your stomach and your intestines first.
Voila, still alive. Mr. Brooks, please.
He's going to explode! Somebody call 911!
Urban Legend was an offer. I didn't read for Urban Legend, and I loved the idea. I love the conceit of it, and I loved, playing the idea that I was a professor of culture and legends. And it just turned out to be this remarkable cast: Joshua Jackson and Rebecca Gayheart, Alicia Witt. And Rebecca is underrated in that movie. Her work at the end of that movie, where she's ready to dissect Alicia Witt. So really some terrifying stuff and some really terrific acting. I've seen Rebecca on stage, and she's the real thing. She's just a remarkable actress. I'm very proud of that movie. I think it's a great little film, and I think it really holds up. A lot like Wes Craven's New Nightmare and Freddy vs. Jason. It really holds up.
Welcome to my nightmare.
Well, I think part 3, Dream Warriors, is probably the most popular of the Nightmare on Elm Street movies, but Freddy vs. Jason certainly was the most successful in theatrical release. That was a project that was just percolating forever. And, people would go, oh, New Line Cinema's exploiting, Jason and Freddy and blah, blah, blah. And in fact, when I was doing I did the NBC Sacramento, capital of California, Thanksgiving Day parade in my little bow tie with my band perm and my suspenders. And when I got off the float at the end, in cold Sacramento, and all I was doing was just getting ready to jump in the car and drive into the wine country for Thanksgiving, a biker pulled up on an extended fork Harley Davidson, good-looking guy, long blonde hair and a beard, ripped off his jean jacket and pulled his pants down and took his shirt off and said, look. And he had a full torso, Japanese Yakuza style tattoo, ink of Freddy wrestling with Jason, went all around from his neck to his knees. And so that's November of 1984. That's the first time I saw the Freddy versus Jason thing. It had become that adolescent fantasy that teenage boys and fanboys have, much like they did back in the 1930s, sitting on the stoop somewhere going, hey, who do you think would win between Frankenstein and the Wolfman? Well, they made Frankenstein versus the Wolfman. Who do you think would win between Dracula and, the Invisible Man? They made those movies, and they made those graphic novels and those comic books, Superman versus Batman. So this is nothing new. This sort of percolating Freddy versus Jason thing had been going on for years until it actually seeped into the corridors of New Line Cinema, and they began to consider it. And I think they went through a lot of scripts. They couldn't quite get it right, but I think it took the perceptions and the genius of Ronnie Yu, who I had literally, with John Landis, given an award to for Bride of Chucky. I think it took his sensibilities and then this sort of great script and this idea that it should sort of be previously on Nightmare on Elm Street and Friday the 13th, and then leading into this story of these two figures meeting, these two monsters meeting. I think it's almost like a graphic novel. And I'm real proud of that film. It really holds up. It's really fun to see on a nice big flat screen with the sound turned up and some cold pizza.
This ain't my first barbecue, son!
2001 Maniacs. I had worked for New Line for a long time, and I was always going through the new interns at New Line. New Line's very good about graduating people up, cameramen and crews and interns. And I'd met Michael DeLuca was still with New Line at that time, and Michael had an assistant who he would send back and forth to the set. And Tim, his assistant, came up to me one day on the set and introduced himself and told me he was writing this script based on one of the earliest kind of punk horror films, comedy, pre Sam Raimi Evil Dead. Would I be interested? And he was writing this part for me, and I said sure. And then lo and behold, years later, he came to me and with a completed script, and he had backing, and a lot of important people as producers. So I was really happy to do it. We were supposed to do it in LA, and I think there was a fire on the back lot at Universal or somewhere, and where we were going to shoot our exteriors. And so we had to kind of reconfigure everything, and we rushed off to Georgia. And I think it really added to the production value. They literally found this town made of old antebellum buildings from all over the South that had been moved there to create this a town that approximated a town in the 19th century America. So that was the home of the Maniacs.
We need to know how you survived that night.
Survived? Is that what you call this? Did I survive? No, I assure you, I am still very much in hell.
Well, I had auditioned for season 3 of Stranger Things, the Carrie Elwes role. And I got steered wrong on it. I think I thought they wanted it like the mayor in Jaws, sort of like a used car salesman, that kind of guy, in a plaid jacket. But I think what they really wanted was sleek 80s power tie guy, which Carrie's perfect. And also he had to be a philanderer, and no one would philander with me. I was old, then, but Carrie's so good looking, made sense that he would be a philanderer. But I really loved the show, and I had met Millie Bobby Brown very early on in her career, and I didn't know she was English, and I didn't know she was that young, and I met her, and I told her mother, I said, can I talk to Millie, and tell her that she listens better on film than actresses 3 times, than movie stars, than Oscar-winning actresses. She has that gift of listening. I watched that show, all of it, and I was a big fan. And then they asked for me to send in a little piece of film for part 4. And I did, and I got the part almost immediately. It was wonderful, and I was really happy that I got to work with Maya Hawke in my scene. I was really impressed with some work she and Joe Healy had done in season 3, in a soiled mall bathroom. After they'd been drugged with psychedelics by the Russians, they come down and, they've been flirting for 2 seasons, at Ships Ahoy. And now he finally extends his hand to her in awful stalls under fluorescent lighting in a mall bathroom. And she needs to come out to him. And their work in that scene, the 2 of them, is so extraordinary. And I literally watched it before I even knew I was doing Stranger Things. I watched that sequence twice. I really did think that was some exquisite acting by those young people. And then she was right there for me with the difficulty of being blind and in my cell. And she was really there for me, both Natalie on the other side of the bars, which was great.
I never set out to become a horror icon. Something I wasn't planning, it's just something that happened.
Like most actors, you don't realize that this is going to be a life-changing moment.
If the guy behind the makeup isn't selling it right, then it doesn't work.
Can't have any style of film without having a charismatic person at the helm.
He brought so much into Freddy, the way he built Freddy.
Robert still managed to make him not just horrific, but likable.
That's why you hire an actor.
And he's Robert Englund, for God's sake.
Now that's some prime time.
I was a little apprehensive. I thought it might be a bit too specialized, and specific. And I kind of suggested that, maybe we make it more with the thrust of, I'm just an old character actor, an old utility actor who survived in Hollywood for over 50 years. And during discussion, I realized what great fanboys Chris Griffins and Gary Smart were. They were sort of like hanging out with a couple of personal IMBD computers. And it was great fun for me because I'm an Anglophile. Whenever I was searching for the name of some wonderful English actor that I loved in a Hammer film or something, they were right there with the answer. And so we actually became friends right away, because they not only do they love genre films, they love all films. It became quite evident to me that we could shoot the shit about this stuff and really, really go down some rabbit holes that were specific to my influences, whether it was a Warren Oates rabbit hole or Strother Martin or whichever Herbert Lom, whichever particular actor that I was trying to make a point about. They were right there with me, and I knew they knew who I was talking about. And so, even though we were interrupted by COVID, they followed me around a bit to screenings and film festivals and a couple of fan conventions, and they came down to visit me in LA. Slowly but surely pieced it together. They were able to, from some of my reminiscences, they would find people that I liked or actors that I love, like Lance Hendrickson or some of my co-stars, or behind the screen, behind the camera people that I'd worked with, and avail themselves of their interviews as well.